Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel.
Hello, and welcome to my channel! My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the historical fiction novel, The Iron King by Maurice Druon. This is the first book in the Accursed Kings series by Maurice. It is a first book of 7 books. Some people only consider it a 6-book series, but anyway, this is the first book in the series, and this is a historical fiction set in the Middle Ages. It is set right before the events of the 100 Years' War in the early 1300s. And what this book is about the French monarchy. And the King of France is this Iron King named Philip IV. And Philip in this book is, he's what we would consider middle-aged, but for the Middle Ages, he was getting a little bit older, and he has been a very stern but powerful ruler of France, and his children are, spread out and married and, have many political marriages. And this book is about how his dynasty starts to unravel when it is found out that his daughters-in-law have been having an affair, and his daughter is the one that basically finds out. His daughter is the Queen of England, and so there's this entire political pressure movement to try to get rid of the to frame the adulterers and to find out who they're doing the affair with and stuff like that. But then there's also this other B storyline, which is actually, if you think about it, kind of an A storyline, but it is about the Knights Templar, and the Knights Templar group from France at this point has been basically persecuted by King Philip because they basically went against his wishes, and so he started persecuting them, and their Grand Master has now been executed in this book, and he places a curse on the king, and the king is worried about this curse that's placed on him. And so that's the basic premise of the book. And it is very much a political, historical fiction book, but it almost reads like a fantasy, like the kind of the medieval setting, the kings versus kings type things. And in fact, you can see on the cover here, it's blurbed as saying, "The original Game of Thrones" by George Martin himself. And you know what? Having read Game of Thrones and seen the TV show, absolutely agree. There are so many ways that I could tell that this book totally influenced Game of Thrones. The execution of the Grand Master in this book clearly seems to connect to the execution of the main character in the first book, A Game of Thrones. I guess I won't spoil A Game of Thrones for you if you haven't read it, which I think everybody knows. There's a major execution that happens in this book that is basically like the major execution in this book. Also, a lot of the ways that the political characters are conniving behind each other's backs and working for jockeying for power is very much the same way that happens in Game of Thrones. The curse in this book almost, to me, read a little bit like having the threat of the Targaryens coming back, because it's the curse here is something bad's going to happen. You don't know what it is. And in A Game of Thrones, the whole thing is of course they're worried about the White Walkers, but they're also worried about, hey, there's this Targaryen girl, she might come back and take over power. So it's interesting how many similarities. In fact, there's one character in here that is just Littlefinger. I mean, it's obvious that George Martin based Littlefinger off of a character in this book. And so there's so many great connections to Game of Thrones. So if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you'll like it. But even if you're not a Game of Thrones fan, if you haven't read it, this is a great short book. It's 300 pages. It only takes a couple hours to read. And even though some of the language is a little bit archaic, because it was originally written in the 1950s in French, this is a translated version, but still, because it was 1950s language, it's a bit different than the type of language you'd expect to read in a book. And so some of the terms and some of the words you might have to look up, but it's still a great, fantastic read. I think Maurice did a tremendous job of keeping me on the edge of my seat the entire book. The book perspective changes midway through. The beginning of the book is like the big political characters, and then the middle of the book is basically this attendant who is sending a message, and then the end of the book is a bunch of different characters. It's the political characters, it's the attendant, it's other characters involved, and so there's the book is surprisingly epic for being so short. And it's the first book of a series, as I mentioned. I have the first 5. I intend to read these about once a month. And if this book's any indication, this is going to be a top book for me. One of my friends and also one of my channel members here on the channel actually said, Jonathan, I think that historical fiction is just the genre for you because you seem to really like everything you're reading in it. And you know what? Darn it, he's right. I'm loving historical fiction. And I just love how this, this is dealing with something really scandalous and really, bad, but it's not like explicit like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is an explicit book series, and it's very, very R-rated. This is like PG-13. You know what they're talking about. You know that they are referencing scandalous affairs in this book, but it's appropriate. And I think it's handled very well. And so just in every way, I just had a blast reading this book. And I cannot wait to continue on with the series. And so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Solid, fantastic book. If you've read The Iron King by Maurice Druon, let me know in the comments section what you thought about it. And what other historical fiction like this do you enjoy? Let me know those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.